The answer, my friend, is blowing in the wind. The answer is blowing in the wind.
Welcome to IndieWire's Filmmaker Toolkit podcast. My guest today is James Mangold, the co-writer and director of A Complete Unknown. And in this conversation, he's got a lot of useful information that I hope you'll enjoy as much as I did. Well, to get started, I know on this movie you're obviously working with a lot of people you've worked with before, Faden, Ariane, many others. What are the initial conversations that you have with your department heads about just kind of the overall guiding principles of the movie?
That's a great question. I mean, I think that you talk about what the movie's about, what it's essentially about, which I saw it as a kind of circular film about someone arriving but also running away from something. And then I saw it as an ending that was also about running away and perhaps arriving at something, and about transformation, talking about talent in the way it changes our lives, even of the person who has it, meaning that it not only becomes a kind of carpet ride of ascent, but it also becomes a way that many relationships become suddenly transactional or are colored by the fact that you have some kind of golden ability that everyone either worships or resents or analyzes, parses, and that you yourself become or may feel like a kind of commodity. And that, to me, was a really interesting thing to explore in the film. How does that relate to my department heads and how we attack the movie? Well, several things. One is I really saw in this particular story, in this particular window of Bob Dylan's life, especially with the kind of almost fairy tale-like arrival of this kind of blank young man with a new name and $3 in his pocket and a guitar, the possibility for something very human, a kind of parable or very human story. And I think most of the movies and treatments of, particularly in the music world, but particularly Bob Dylan, are very chilly and cool in both the temperature, but also in the style factor. When I talked to Faden about how we do it, it seemed too obvious to me that you try and do it kind of super grainy, shaky cam documentary style and kind of emulate the Penny Baker movie or something. I felt like all of that would defeat us. And I much more brought my own sensibility, but kind of, references in my own mind, shooting styles from things as diverse as like East of Eden. And even from my own repertoire, kind of trying to think about how we make sure we're not looking at the stage as much as we're with the players on the stage. That most film treatments of music, when the music starts, tend to retreat to kind of a documentation of how the concert looks from the fifth row center, and that I've never been that interested in it. What I'm more interested in, the point of view that you would never feel, which is what it feels like from where they're standing at the mic. And particularly for this film, the kind of loneliness you might feel as a single artist with one instrument playing folk music, the kind of intensity of focus you feel when you're the only thing on the stage. And it was something that Dylan talked about with me. In terms of part of the yearning for a band wasn't just a kind of ambition to kind of change things up in some cultural way. I don't even think he necessarily perceived how shocking people would find it. But to change things up in a personal way, like, what he told me was he felt lonely. It's really lonely doing shows day in and day out where you're the only person in the car, and then you're the only person on the stage, and you're the only person in the dressing room, and then you're the only person going home, and you're the only person playing guitar, and you're the only person singing. And that there's no one to check in with, there's no one to bounce an idea off of. It's just all on you. And for a guy who grew up loving Buddy Holly and Little Richard, it wasn't the only image he had in his mind. And I think all of that was important to try and impart. I really wanted, also having my childhood was in New York. I was born in 63, so I missed some of the years of this movie in terms of consciousness. But I really remember walking to like first and second grade from my parents' apartment in the Lower East Side, and the smell and the taste and the look of the city in those days. And I really wanted in some way to capture that again. And Francois Audouy and our whole team and Ariane, everyone set out to try to kind of find that New York again.
Mm-hmm. And what were some of your directives to them in terms of presenting New York in that period? I mean, I feel like it is a movie where there's just so much texture to it. Like you can really feel, like when people are walking down the street in New York in this movie, you kind of like, I don't know, you can almost feel the kind of grime in the air a little bit.
Well, we did wet downs. We spent endless amounts of time throwing garbage on the street. I mean, it was just blowing pieces of schmutz wherever you could find it. I would arrive and go, they're just not dirty enough. The city was basically approaching default at that point, and these were neighborhoods where the rents were incredibly cheap. That's why the artists gathered there. And so what you had kind of happening was this great mix of kind of, truckers and pickle factories and strange warehouses, and then kind of artist dwellings and nightclubs and music emporiums that were built into old retail spaces or old Italian restaurants, and so you're thinking about all the ways that you can kind of recreate MacDougall and the rest of the village of that time. But of course, it's gone in New York. We couldn't, even if we wanted to, I don't think it would really be possible to shoot in New York City because it's just so developed in every direction. That's the beauty of Jersey, is that there's several different cities, Paterson, Jersey City, that are kind of preserved in amber still. Same kind of architecture, same brownstone, same storefronts, only literally essentially unchanged since the 60s. But also, there's also not 5-star restaurants in each block, but it would cost $250,000 a night to shut down.
Mm-hmm. Now, you mentioned you had conversations with Dylan. How involved was he in the early stages when you were writing? I mean, did he give you a lot of input or?
A lot. Well, I mean, I met with him 4 or 5 times for 4 or 5 hours at a clip, and had really elongated conversations with him about minutia and macro ideas, and obviously wanted to learn about what he thought about all the characters in the movie and his perceptions and memories of them. And it was hugely informative in the writing. This also happened on Walk the Line. There's stuff in Walk the Line, that's truer than what's in the autobiographies, because there was myth making going on when Johnny wrote those autobiographies with June in the 60s, and by the time they were in their 70s and I was making this movie, they're ready to let go of some of those embellishments. In a different way, Bob was really just filling in gaps, and I'm not sure most musicologists and biographers wouldn't ask him the kinds of questions I was asking him, in the sense of really digging at how to play and dramatize the scenes. What were the attitudes you had about them? What were the attitudes they had about you? And also, how did they change? And obviously, he has tremendous admiration still for all the main characters in the movie, and in some ways remains a bit puzzled about what kind of came off the rails. Like, he never, in one sense, I don't think thought it was going to be such an explosion. I always enjoy looking at moments in history, especially creative history, because it's so much more obscure than political history, and watching characters make decisions that are going to have massive cultural reverberations, but they're not aware that they're making choices that will have massive cultural reverberations. They're just making choices, and the way they get magnified over time is really interesting to me.
Mm-hmm. Well, going back to that idea of putting the audience on the stage with the people, I have to say, like, my favorite moment in the movie, the thing that I just loved, was in the Newport section where he goes electric. The crowd noise in that scene, like, every other concert movie I've ever seen in my life, it's either everyone applauds and everyone loves it, or everyone boos and it's horrible. And you did something really interesting here with the crowd reaction, which is, it's this weird mix.
They're at war with themselves.
Exact. That's a perfect way of putting it. And I wanted you to talk about that, because I loved that. That was like the moment where I really just, I just thought that was brilliant.
Well, I thought, thank you. I mean, it was trying to reflect what really happened, which is some people liked it and a lot of people didn't, and some were really angry, and some were angry to the point of throwing things or walking out, and others were ecstatic. And that a crowd is a really weird thing, and staging extras is a weird, really interesting kind of, in any movie, staging extras is really interesting because often when they're being directed, the ADs will tell them, when this happens, cheer, and when this happens, and so what you get is this unanimity, this kind of giant multi-headed hydra that reacts kind of exactly the same on cue and feels like bullshit, frankly, most of the time. And so you do what you can to kind of literally find different extras and give them different directions, or ask those with their last names between A and L do this, those with their but then even that doesn't work because you realize it's too random. What there really would be is warring pods, like, because people come together to a show, right? So probably the like-minded Bob, we want Tambourine Man people would be in a group, and then we think this is awesome that he's going full rock would be in another group, and you just have to find it. And the background talent has to have the energy to actually really be on their toes and not kind of phoning it in. I mean, because it's hard. That work is hard and requires a tremendous amount of patience. And we had great people on our show.
What kinds of things did you learn from Walk the Line that informed your approach here?
Well, it gave me the confidence to demand that the actors sing. And that wasn't necessarily going to be a problem for my actors, meaning they were nervous at the beginning, but they were willing to give it a go. It's what they do. But there were producers, and the studio itself were kind of like, what happens if this doesn't work? And that's kind of the whole insanity of a movie, is you almost, by definition, to do something interesting, have to set off to do something that is challenging and therefore has a chance of failure. And that, of course, scares any studio because all businesses try to eliminate all chances of failure. But it was that Walk the Line gave me license to say, I've done it before. Mm-hmm. This can work.
And so in terms of the recording, in terms of shooting those performance scenes and recording and all of that, I mean, it feels like most of it's done live. I mean, how much of it is pre-records and how much is live? And
almost nothing is pre-records. Particularly on the Timmy side, it's just Timmy. I mean, all of Newport 65, those are Timmy's vocals in the mic as we're shooting. So, I mean, all flash all the way back to the first 10 minutes. Him sitting down with Woody Guthrie in that hospital is a live recording of him on the set singing that song and everything in between. The pre-records don't really offer you much in the sense of they're great sounding recordings, but particularly within the confines of folk music, the perfection of the studio recording is the aspect that's least interesting, because it's not even an aspect that's true of the real folk music when it was being made. It's never, it's rare that people talk about the audiophile folk album or the, Maria Callas level vocals of a folk artist. It's mostly about authenticity and commitment and a kind of connection to the words. And that's the beauty of folk music. And so that was the argument I maintained from the beginning, which was just that you can't make a movie about a medium that's built on authenticity while you've got earwigs in the ears of your actors and they're mouthing their words like a ventriloquist dummy to a pre-record. That's just gonna hurt. And we did record the pre-records. They're what you can buy on the record. And certainly the act of getting in the studio before we went out to location to shoot, getting the recordings down was in itself a kind of training. It was like the actors going through what Bob or Joan or whoever went through making an album. And I think it was a huge growth period for them, suddenly falling in and being able to find the voice of the songs. And Nick Baxter did an incredible job getting those recordings down. But then when we got to set, there just became the opportunity for the actors to remain free enough if they could be singing without being enslaved to whatever was getting piped in their ear.
So that idea of, letting the actors be free, I'm curious for you, because one thing I think all your movies going back to Heavy are marked by, fantastic performances. What kind of environment do you like to try to create both in prep and on set as a director, to try to help facilitate the actor's best work?
I mean, over the years, there's a couple things I've learned that I don't know if they work for everyone, but they work for me. One is I don't rehearse much. Two is I do spend the time others spend rehearsing, hanging out. I like my actors and me to get to know each other. And I learned this really on Copland from Bob De Niro, who worked like 3 weeks on the movie, but made a real point of asking me out to tea or go on research trips with him in prep. And sometimes I wondered, why is he like doing this? Like these scenes aren't that complicated, or, you know, he would want to read through the scene again with me. And somewhere it dawned on me, oh, he's getting to know me. And he's insisting that I make myself known to him. And by the time we had our last meeting, Bob turned to me and he said, don't be shy when we start shooting. And he's like, I don't work with young directors very often because they get shy. And he's like, your voice, always remember saying, your voice won't bother me. And I go, okay. He goes, anyone else's voice will bother me. Your voice won't bother me. So even if I'm in the middle of a scene, you got something to say, you say it. Say it to me while I'm in. Correct me, guide me. I want to be directed. And, you know, he's talking to a 30-year-old man and who deeply admires him, and he gave me this license to direct him. But it came from getting to know each other. You know, his dad was a painter, my dad's a painter. Our dads knew each other. There was some level we got to know each other. And what I've tried on every movie is to establish trust. Trust not meaning in the normal sense, but trust in the sense that what I'm telling you was the truth. So I don't hide whatever bullshit I might be dealing with the studio or anything. I don't hide from the cast. And I don't want them to hide anything from me. Because from that kind of environment comes risk-taking. Also, I am unafraid to kind of act silly or act out the scene. And because I'm a writer on the movie, I think it also really helps the actors feel like, A, they can challenge the words, and I don't worry about it because I'm like, if it's better, I'll change it in a heartbeat. But B, it's that when you're the writer, you're also kind of acting too. You're their partner. And there's a level of play, you're really in the mix with them. And that produces another kind of trust that also allows people to take leaps. I mean, long ago I had a conversation with Meg Ryan, we were making Kate and Leopold, and she was like, you know, you let me try anything, and other directors don't do that, and I don't understand why. And I said, because I know that if I say it doesn't work for me, you'll stop. When I teach directing, one of the things I try to encourage among young directors is just, as long as you establish you can kill something that you don't like, then you can let all these flowers bloom. But if you live in a fear of having to say that doesn't work for me, or that's too intimidating to say that, then you're actually killing possibility before it's even born. Because you're kind of creating an environment that's so restrictive that an idea might occur to one of your collaborators that they won't even express or show because they know you've got a plan and you're sticking to it, and that's what it is. And I don't know, this is a very interesting process question. I could talk about it a lot. I do believe in having a plan, and I do believe in owning the plan so fully that when your collaborators present you with new ideas, it doesn't upend your plan, it just modifies or enhances your plan. And that you're not so stuck on whatever you scribbled or the storyboards you made that you cannot adapt. You know, I've at this point known and befriended a lot of great directors, from Milos Forman to Alexander McKendrick to Steven Spielberg, on and on and on. And the one thing I can say consistently is they may have a plan, but when I see them working, what we all do is if something better comes up, we jump on it and make it look like we thought of it. Like, we don't just jump on it and shoot it, but we own it, frame it in a way that it looks like we planned it. That is master directing, meaning it's not having a plan, a vision, you had it, and all these puppets are in my way if they don't go along with my, it's the other. It's the fact that, oh my God, it's raining today, but that's not an obstacle, that's actually, look how it enhances the scene, or how I can make that sky enhance the scene. And that's where that extra leap that gets taken by a director to use the flowers that are growing.
Yeah, I always wonder if even guys like Hitchcock who claim they had everything so planned out, if that's actually true.
No, it's not.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a book, I forgot which is, I think it might be called Hitchcock's Notebooks, but it's not true. I mean, if that were the case, then his editors were like animation editors. They just had to put the ends and beginnings of these shots together and walk away. And that's not true. He had really great editors, and he did shoot coverage. He did shoot alternate angles and experimental angles, and he didn't just catch the part where they said that one line and then say cut. But that was his branding and his mark. He was a brilliant self-marketeer, and he sold himself as, the shooting is just a chore to execute my vision, which of course goes with the way most press addresses filmmakers, which is that we're some kind of visionary who sees the whole movie in advance, and then the entire process of making it becomes like how we force our vision through the obstacle of the system and the actors. My experience, not just my own, but with many other filmmakers, is that is a false myth. It's partly true in that a lot of the great filmmakers have a vision, but the vision, just like sailing a ship, allows them to deal with different kinds of seas and different kinds of oceans and waterways, and that they adapt their vision and are confident enough in their vision that they can execute it under different circumstances. And Hitchcock, that's definitely true. I mean, he was finding things and seeing things on set, but he was servicing a media machine that wants to think of him as a kind of Svengali.
Yeah. Now, so talking about kind of how to make something great, or you have to risk like you say, you have to risk failure, you have to risk that it might not work. I'm curious, like when you get into not just the editing room, but even initially screening the movie for people and showing people the movie. Are you surprised by things that you thought worked that don't, or things that you weren't sure that worked that do? Of course. Yeah.
I mean, there's always stuff where, but usually the thing, it's not even just as simple as failure or success, because those are kind of results. It's more about like every narrative to be unique has its own liability that is partly also its unique asset. You have to find a way to both understand that part of what makes the story special is this liability, but I also have to gird the audience and prepare them to deal with it. It's kind of hard to talk about in the abstract, but it's like if you have a team that can run better than it can pass, well then, but that doesn't mean you abandon the pass. It just means you have to set it up better. There's this kind of way you have to use the run to free your passing game, which you may not have as strong players as you have on the running side. There's all these ways that directing a movie becomes a series of balancing and counterbalancing the narrative itself. What's going to be pulling them? What primal kind of suspense or energy is holding you to the screen? Is it kind of sensual, or is it erotic? Is it danger? What is it? And if it isn't primal, I usually feel like you're in trouble. Like if you're not really, movies make you laugh, cry, get turned on, or scared. Mm-hmm. That's it. Those are like the 4 pedals on the organ. If you're not hitting one of those once in a while, your audience is feeling nothing.
And so on Complete Unknown, what did you see as the potential liability that you had to sort of, be careful about?
Well, I thought I thought what we were doing was kind of sweet and moving and kind of innocent. And I thought it ran 100% counter to the way people perceive Bob Dylan, aloof, cool, elusive, enigmatic. And that's all there. I mean, I understand where those words come from, but that I also felt like without providing easy answers, which would be another liability or another danger, I wanted us to be able to get close to the characters and watch them, exist with them, not in a performative way. I always feel like when I watch the Pennebaker documentaries or other things, Bob is really aware they're shooting him. And I wanted to be the opposite of that. But I also was trying to capture this 19-year-old who was neither aware anyone was shooting him also not aware he was ever getting anywhere. And so that there was a kind of energy to this very self-possessed young man with this moleskin notebook of song lyrics and a beaten up guitar, who arrived in Manhattan and had the presumption to just change his name and land himself at Woody Guthrie's bedside with a song he's written for him. It's like a fairy tale, and this is true. And he ends up kind of taking his mantle. And so there's a kind of Shakespearean beauty to the story, and also Woody Guthrie has a first lieutenant in Pete Seeger, who is neither as kind of explosively talented as Woody or Bob, but is kind of, as his, in a way, Pete's talent. I mean, obviously he has great talent as an entertainer and singer-songwriter and folk musician, but his real talent was organizing and a movement, whether it was saving the Hudson River or folk music itself. And he built folk music into something. And by the time Bob arrived, the only element he needed was kind of a star. And Bob steps in and becomes that, but then kind of eclipses the entire world. I mean, it's such a wonderful fairy tale. And so when you say, what was our liability? I felt like I really wanted to tell that story. And I didn't want to exist in the kind of pseudo-documentarian cool of a movie that was trying to lay back, but honestly, more in my normal voice, whether I was doing Ford Ferrari or I'm doing Walk the Line, which is just to allow the actors to be and to feel intimate with them and to feel their feelings. When I hung with Bob Dylan, I didn't feel someone who was aloof or dispassionate. I felt someone who loved movies and loved music and loved thinking about character and story and his own life, and had feelings about it. And I think sometimes when people look at our trailers, when they see it boiled down, they almost some of the kind of go, oh, what is, like, they don't. But I think when they actually see the film and you kind of enter it from the beginning and go through it, I think it's really interesting in the way that Timmy pulls you in and the other actors really pull you in.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Well, this has been great. I could listen to you talk about movies and movie making all day.
You're asking great questions. Sorry I blather on so much.
No, it's great. Thanks so much for taking the time.
I appreciate it.
Appreciate it.